The blizzard came down from the mountains like the wrath of God himself, turning the New Mexico territory into a white hell that swallowed everything in its path. And Hannah Keller knew with absolute certainty that she would die if she did not find shelter within the next hour. Her fingers had gone numb 2 miles back, and now she could barely feel her feet in the stirrups. The horse beneath her was struggling, its breath coming in great plumes of steam that were instantly torn away by the howling wind. She had been traveling from Santa Fe to Fort Stanton to meet her brother, a foolish journey that everyone at the last trading post had warned her against. But she had been so certain the weather would hold for just one more day. Pride and stubbornness had always been her greatest faults, her mother used to say, and now those faults might very well kill her. The landscape had become utterly unrecognizable. The trail she had been following disappeared beneath the snow, and the familiar landmarks were nothing but ghostly shapes in the white void. Her eyelashes were thick with ice, and each breath burned in her lungs. 23 years of life, and it would end here in this frozen wasteland because she had been too stubborn to wait out the storm. Then, through the driving snow, she saw it. A structure, low and dark against the white. At first she thought it might be a mirage, some cruel trick her freezing brain was playing on her, but as she urged her exhausted horse forward, the shape solidified into a cabin. Smoke rose from a chimney, or at least she thought it did. The wind made it hard to tell. But smoke meant fire, and fire meant warmth, and warmth meant life. She half fell, half dismounted from her horse, her legs nearly giving out beneath her when her feet hit the ground. The cold was so intense it felt like being burned. She staggered toward the door, dragging her horse behind her, though the poor animal needed no encouragement to follow her toward the promise of shelter. Hannah's fist struck the wooden door 3 times, though she could barely feel the impact. She waited, counting heartbeats, praying. Nothing. She knocked again, harder this time, desperation lending her strength. Still nothing. Terror clawed at her throat. What if the cabin was abandoned? What if that smoke had been her imagination after all? Please, she tried to call out, but her voice was barely a whisper, stolen by the wind. She raised her fist to knock a 3rd time when the door suddenly swung open, and she found herself looking up into the face of a man who seemed to have been carved from the same rough landscape that surrounded them. He was tall, with dark hair that fell past his collar and eyes the color of storm clouds. A thick beard covered the lower half of his face, and he wore a heavy wool shirt that looked like it had seen better days. For a moment, they simply stared at each other. Hannah opened her mouth to speak, to explain, to beg for shelter, but no words came out. The cold had stolen her voice, or perhaps it was the intensity of his gaze that rendered her speechless. "Get inside," he said, his voice rough but not unkind. He reached out and took her arm, pulling her into the cabin with surprising gentleness given the urgency of the situation. "Your horse!" "Outside," she managed to croak. Without another word, he grabbed a coat from a peg by the door and pushed past her into the storm. She stood in the doorway, swaying slightly, watching as he took her horse by the reins and led it around the side of the cabin. He was back in less than a minute, his shoulders and hair white with snow. "There is a lean-to around back," he explained as he shut the door firmly against the wind. "Your horse will be safe there with mine." The warmth of the cabin hit her like a physical force, and suddenly her legs would not hold her anymore. She started to sink toward the floor, but strong hands caught her under the arms and guided her to a chair near the fireplace. "You are half frozen," the man said, kneeling in front of her and beginning to work at the laces of her boots. His hands moved with practiced efficiency. "How long were you out there?" "I do not know," Hannah admitted, her teeth chattering so violently she could barely speak. "Hours." I left the last trading post this morning. The storm came up so fast. That is how it happens out here, he said, pulling off her boots and setting them near the fire. Then, without warning, he began to rub her feet through her thick woolen socks, trying to restore circulation. The touch was clinical, impersonal, but Hannah felt her face flush anyway. You are lucky to be alive. Another hour and you would not have been. She knew he was right. She looked around the cabin, taking in her surroundings properly for the first time. It was a single room, sparsely furnished but clean and well-maintained. A bed stood against one wall, covered with what looked like several layers of quilts. A table and 2 chairs occupied the center of the space, and shelves lined the walls, filled with supplies and books. Books. She had not expected to see books in a remote cabin in the middle of nowhere. "Thank you," she said, finding her voice at last. "I know I have no right to impose on you like this, but I had nowhere else to go." He looked up at her, and for the first time she saw the hint of a smile in those storm-gray eyes. "You are no stranger to me anymore," he said simply. "The moment you knocked on my door, you became my responsibility. That is how it works out here." Something in the way he said it made her heart skip a beat, though she told herself it was just relief at being rescued. "I am Hannah Keller," she said, extending a hand that still trembled from the cold. His large hand enveloped hers, warm and calloused and strong. "Yates Brennan," he replied. "And before you ask, yes, I live out here alone. Have for the past 5 years. 5 years alone in this isolated place." Hannah could not imagine it. She had been alone for less than a day on the trail and had nearly died from it. "You must be very self-sufficient," she said. Yates released her hand and stood, moving to a pot that hung over the fire. "You learn quickly or you do not survive," he said, ladling something that smelled absolutely heavenly into a tin cup. "Drink this. It is just broth, but it will help warm you from the inside." She accepted the cup gratefully, wrapping both hands around it and inhaling the steam. The first sip burned her tongue, but she did not care. It tasted like life itself. "I was traveling to Fort Stanton," she explained between sips. "My brother is stationed there. He is with the cavalry. I was supposed to meet him 3 days ago, but I ran into delays." "Fort Stanton is a good 20 miles from here," Yates said, settling into the chair across from her. "You were heading in the right direction at least, but this storm is going to last for days by the look of it. You will not be going anywhere for a while." The reality of her situation was beginning to sink in. She was stranded in a remote cabin with a complete stranger, a man she knew absolutely nothing about except that he lived alone and had kind hands and eyes that seemed to see right through her. It should have frightened her, but somehow it did not. There was something solid and trustworthy about Yates Brennan, something that made her feel safe despite the circumstances. "I hope I will not be too much of an inconvenience," she said quietly. "You will be sleeping in my bed," he stated matter-of-factly. "I will take the floor. There are spare blankets and I have slept in worse places. Tomorrow, if the storm breaks enough, I will need to check on the horses and make sure we have enough firewood to last. You can help with cooking if you know how." "I know how," she assured him. "My mother made sure I learned all the domestic arts before she passed." Something flickered in his eyes. "My condolences. How long ago?" 2 years, Hannah said. "My father passed when I was young. It has been just my brother and me for a while now." Yates nodded, seeming to understand the weight of loss without needing further explanation. He stood and began moving about the cabin, pulling out blankets and arranging them near the fire for her clothes to dry on. His movements were efficient and practiced, the actions of a man who had long since learned to take care of himself. Hannah finished the broth and set the cup aside, feeling warmth beginning to return to her body at last. Her fingers tingled painfully as sensation returned, but she welcomed the discomfort. It meant she was alive, that she would keep all her fingers and toes. The alternative did not bear thinking about. "You should get out of those wet clothes," Yates said, not looking at her as he spoke. "There is a nightshirt in the chest by the bed. It will be too large for you, but it is clean and dry. I will turn my back." She did as he suggested, moving stiffly toward the chest and finding the nightshirt where he said it would be. It was made of soft flannel, worn from many washings but still serviceable. True to his word, Yates kept his back turned, staring into the fire as she changed. The nightshirt swallowed her, hanging down past her knees and with sleeves that went well beyond her fingertips, but it was blissfully dry and warm. "You can look now," she said softly. He turned, and she caught something in his expression, gone so quickly she might have imagined it. "You should rest," he said. "You have been through an ordeal. Tomorrow will be soon enough to talk more." But Hannah found she did not want to rest, not yet. Despite her exhaustion, or perhaps because of it, she felt strangely alive, aware of every sensation, every detail of this moment. She was alone with a stranger who had saved her life, in a cabin that felt removed from the rest of the world, cut off by the storm that raged outside. It felt significant somehow, like the beginning of something she could not quite name. "Tell me about yourself," she said instead, settling back into the chair. 5 years is a long time to live alone. What brought you out here?" Yates was quiet for a long moment, and she thought he might refuse to answer. But then he sank back into his own chair, his eyes fixed on the fire. "I was a soldier once," he said finally. "Fought in the war. When it was over, I found I could not go back to civilization. Too many people, too much noise. Out here there is peace, quiet. A man can think." There was so much left unsaid in those words, so much pain barely concealed beneath the surface. Hannah recognized it because she carried her own share of pain, her own losses and regrets. "I understand," she said quietly. "Sometimes the world is too much." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she felt the weight of his gaze like a physical touch. "Yes," he agreed. "Sometimes it is." They sat in companionable silence for a while, listening to the crackle of the fire and the howl of the wind outside. It should have been awkward, this enforced intimacy with a stranger, but somehow it was not. Instead, it felt natural, as if they had known each other for years rather than mere hours. "I should let you rest," Yates said eventually, rising from his chair. "You need sleep." Hannah wanted to protest, to keep talking, but exhaustion was catching up with her at last. Her eyelids felt heavy, and the warmth of the fire was making her drowsy. She allowed him to guide her to the bed, where she sank into the mattress with a grateful sigh. "Thank you," she murmured, already half asleep, "for saving my life." "Sleep well, Hannah Keller," Yates said softly, and she heard him moving away, arranging his blankets on the floor. She wanted to say more, to tell him that she felt something shifting inside her, something she did not quite understand. But sleep claimed her before she could form the words. Hannah woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of someone moving quietly around the cabin. For a moment, she could not remember where she was, and panic seized her. Then memory flooded back, and she sat up to find Yates standing by the stove, his back to her. "Good morning," he said without turning around. "I hope you slept well." "I did," she admitted, surprised to find it was true. Despite the strangeness of the situation, she had slept more soundly than she had in weeks. "What time is it?" "Near noon, I would guess," Yates replied, finally turning to face her. "The storm is still going strong. We will not be going anywhere today." Hannah rose from the bed, acutely aware of how little she was wearing. Her clothes were draped over chairs near the fire, but they were still damp. "I should get dressed," she said. "Your clothes are not dry yet," Yates observed. You can wear them if you want, but you will be uncomfortable. I have an extra shirt and some trousers you can wear. They will be too large, but they will be better than nothing. The thought of wearing men's clothing should have scandalized her, but practicality won out over propriety. She accepted the clothes he offered and changed behind the blanket he hung from the rafters to give her privacy. The shirt hung off her shoulders, and she had to roll the sleeves up several times. The trousers required a rope belt to keep them from falling down, and even then they pooled around her ankles. She must have looked ridiculous, but at least she was covered and warm. When she emerged, she caught Yates looking at her with an expression that might have been amusement. "You look like a child playing dress-up," he said, and there was definitely a smile lurking in his voice. "I look like I am drowning in fabric," she retorted, but she was smiling too. It felt good to smile, to find humor in the absurdity of the situation. They ate breakfast together, simple fare of coffee and cornbread, but it tasted better than any fancy meal Hannah had ever had in Santa Fe. They talked as they ate, carefully at first, then with growing ease. She told him about her life before coming to New Mexico, about growing up in Missouri and the difficult years after her father's death. He told her about his ranch, small but growing, and his plans to expand once spring came. "You raise cattle?" she asked. "Mostly horses," he replied. "There is good money in horses, and I prefer working with them to cattle. They are smarter, more responsive. Each one has its own personality." "I never thought about it that way," Hannah said. "I always thought of horses as just transportation." "They are that," Yates agreed. "But they are more too. A good horse can be a friend, a partner. Out here, your horse can mean the difference between life and death." As if to emphasize his point, the wind rattled the shutters, reminding them of the storm that still raged outside. Hannah shivered despite the warmth of the cabin. "My horse," she said suddenly. "I should check on him." "I already did," Yates assured her. "First thing this morning. Both horses are fine, dry, fed, and warm enough. I built that lean to solid specifically for weather like this." She relaxed, grateful for his foresight. "Thank you. I do not even know what I would have done if I had lost him. He was my father's horse, one of the last things I have from him." Yates nodded, understanding. "Then we will make sure he stays safe." The day passed slowly, the storm showing no signs of abating. They played cards with a worn deck Yates produced from a drawer, and Hannah was surprised to find herself enjoying the simple game. She could not remember the last time she had simply relaxed and enjoyed another person's company without the weight of social expectations and propriety pressing down on her. "You are good at this," Yates observed as she won yet another hand. "My brother taught me," she said with a grin. "He said a lady should know how to hold her own in a card game, even if society says otherwise." "Your brother sounds like a wise man." "He is," Hannah agreed, her smile fading slightly. "I worry about him stationed at the fort. It is not the safest place to be." "Fort Stanton is well fortified," Yates said. "He will be fine. The cavalry knows what they are doing." They talked through the afternoon, pausing only to prepare a simple dinner of beans and salt pork. Hannah found herself watching Yates as he moved around the cabin, noting the way his hands were never still, always occupied with some task. There was a quiet competence about him that she found deeply attractive. He was nothing like the men she had known back in Missouri, with their soft hands and softer lives. Yates Brennan had been forged by hardship and solitude, shaped into something strong and enduring. When darkness fell, they sat by the fire again, the cabin lit by the warm glow of the flames. The wind had finally begun to die down, though snow still fell steadily outside. "Tell me about the war," Hannah said quietly. It was a bold question, perhaps too bold, but she wanted to understand him, to know what had shaped him into the man he was. Yates was silent for so long she thought he would not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and distant. "There is not much to tell. I joined when I was 19, full of ideals and patriotism. I thought I would be a hero, that I would make a difference. Instead, I learned that war is nothing but blood and mud and death. I saw men I loved die for reasons I could not understand. I killed men whose only crime was fighting for the other side. By the time it ended, I was 23 and felt like I was 100 years old." Hannah's heart ached for him, for the young man who had gone to war and come back broken. "I am sorry," she said softly. "Everyone lost something in that war," Yates said. "I was luckier than most. I survived. I came out west to find peace, and I found it, most days anyway." She wanted to reach out to him, to offer comfort, but she held back, uncertain if the gesture would be welcome. Instead, she said, "It takes strength to walk away and build a new life." He looked at her, and in the firelight his eyes seemed to hold depth she had not noticed before. "It takes strength to do a lot of things, like traveling alone through a New Mexico winter." "That was not strength," Hannah said with a rueful laugh. "That was foolishness." "Maybe," Yates agreed, "but you are here now, alive, because you kept going even when it would have been easier to give up. That is a kind of strength, too." Something in his words, in the way he looked at her, made Hannah's breath catch. The air between them felt charged, heavy with unspoken things. She found herself leaning forward slightly, drawn by a force she did not quite understand. Yates seemed to feel it, too. He stood abruptly, breaking the moment. "It is late," he said, his voice rougher than usual. "We should sleep. Tomorrow the storm should break enough for me to check the property." Hannah felt a stab of disappointment but nodded. "Of course. You are right." She rose and moved toward the bed, but before she could climb in, Yates spoke again. "Hannah," she turned. "Yes, I am glad you knocked on my door," he said simply. "I know the circumstances are not ideal, but I am glad you are here." Her heart swelled with an emotion she could not name. "So am I," she whispered. That night, sleep was slower to come. Hannah lay in the darkness, listening to Yates breathing on the floor beside the bed, and wondered what was happening to her. She barely knew this man, yet she felt more connected to him than she had to anyone in years. It made no sense, but then again, very little about the past 24 hours made sense. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the storm finally having blown itself out. Hannah woke to find Yates already up and dressed, standing by the window and looking out at the transformed landscape. "It is beautiful," he said when he heard her stirring. "Come see." She joined him at the window, and her breath caught at the sight. The world had been transformed into something magical, everything covered in a thick blanket of pristine white. The sun was just rising, painting the snow in shades of pink and gold. "I have never seen anything like it," she breathed. "This is why I stay," Yates said quietly. "Moments like this, out here you can see the hand of God in everything." They stood together at the window, shoulders nearly touching, and Hannah felt a peace she had not known in years. Whatever happened next, whatever complications lay ahead, she would always have this moment, this perfect morning with this unexpected man. "I need to go check on the horses and assess the damage," Yates said eventually. "Do you want to come with me?" "Yes," Hannah said without hesitation. They bundled up in every warm thing they could find, and Yates insisted she wear his spare coat, which was far too large but wonderfully warm. Then they ventured out into the snow together. The cold was sharp, but not the killing cold of 2 days ago. The world was utterly silent, the snow muffling every sound. Their breath came in white puffs as they made their way around to the lean to where the horses waited. Both animals were in good condition, though clearly happy to see them. Hannah's horse, a sturdy bay gelding named Rusty, nickered in greeting and pushed his nose against her shoulder. "He is a good animal," Yates observed, running an expert hand down the horse's legs. "Your father chose well." "He always did when it came to horses," Hannah said, stroking Rusty's neck. "People, not so much." Yates glanced at her questioningly, but she shook her head. Some stories were better left untold, at least for now. They spent the morning working together, feeding and watering the horses, checking the cabin for damage, and bringing in more firewood. Hannah found herself enjoying the physical labor, the simple satisfaction of work well done. Yates worked beside her, occasionally offering instruction but mostly letting her figure things out on her own. "You are a quick learner," he said as they carried the last load of wood inside. "I have always been practical," Hannah replied. "My mother despaired of ever making me into a proper lady." "I think proper is overrated," Yates said, and there was definitely warmth in his voice now, a softness that had not been there 2 days ago. Over the next few days, they fell into an easy routine. They worked together during the day, maintaining the cabin and caring for the animals. In the evenings, they talked by the fire, sharing stories and slowly learning about each other. Hannah told him about her childhood, about her dreams of seeing more of the world. Yates shared more about his time in the war, painful memories that he had kept locked away for years. "I have never told anyone else about that," he admitted one evening after sharing a particularly difficult story about losing his best friend in battle. "Why tell me?" Hannah asked gently. He looked at her, his gray eyes serious. "Because you listen, really listen. And because something about you makes me want to be honest, to share the parts of myself I usually keep hidden." Hannah's heart raced. "I feel the same way," she confessed. "I have never been able to talk to anyone the way I talk to you." The silence that followed was heavy with implication. They were crossing a line, moving from strangers forced together by circumstance to something else, something deeper and more profound. On the 5th day, the weather had cleared enough that travel was possible again. Neither of them mentioned it at first, but the knowledge hung between them like a sword waiting to fall. "I should go to Fort Stanton," Hannah said finally, over breakfast. "My brother will be worried sick about me." Yates nodded slowly. "I know, I will take you. The trail will be difficult after the storm, and you should not go alone." "You do not have to do that," she protested, even though the thought of leaving him behind filled her with unexpected anguish. "I want to," he said simply. "I need to pick up supplies anyway. It makes sense." But it was not about sense, and they both knew it. It was about neither of them being ready to say goodbye. They left the next morning, both horses saddled and provisioned. The journey to Fort Stanton would take the better part of a day, even in good weather, and the snow would slow them down further. The landscape was stunning, rolling hills covered in white, broken occasionally by dark stands of pine. They rode in comfortable silence for the most part, though occasionally Yates would point out a landmark or share some piece of local knowledge. "That peak there," he said, gesturing to a distant mountain. "That is where I found my first wild horse. Took me 3 days to catch her, but she was worth it. Best mare I have ever owned." Hannah smiled, enjoying these glimpses into his life, his world. She tried to memorize everything, to fix these moments in her mind so she could recall them later, when she was alone again. They stopped at midday to rest the horses and eat a cold lunch. Yates built a small fire to warm their hands, and they sat close together, shoulders touching. "Hannah," Yates said suddenly, his voice rough, "I need to say something." Her heart began to pound. "What is it?" He turned to face her, his expression more open and vulnerable than she had ever seen it. "These past days with you have been the best I have had in years, maybe ever. I know we have only known each other a short time, but I feel like I have known you forever. Like I was waiting for you without even knowing it." Tears pricked at Hannah's eyes. "I feel it too," she whispered. "I do not understand it, but I feel it." "I do not want you to go," he said, reaching out to take her hand. "I know that is selfish. I know you have your own life, your own plans. But I had to tell you, I had to be honest." Hannah looked down at their joined hands, at the way his large, calloused hand completely enveloped her smaller one. It felt right, this connection between them. It felt like coming home. "I do not want to go either," she admitted. "But I have to see my brother. I have to let him know I am safe." "I know," Yates said. "I am not asking you to choose right now. I just needed you to know how I feel." She squeezed his hand, blinking back tears. "Thank you for telling me." They sat like that for a long moment, hands clasped, neither wanting to break the connection. Then, reluctantly, Yates released her and stood. "We should keep moving. We want to reach the fort before dark." The rest of the journey passed too quickly. As the walls of Fort Stanton came into view in the late afternoon, Hannah felt a sense of dread settle in her stomach. This was the end, the moment when reality intruded on the perfect bubble they had been living in. The fort was a bustle of activity, soldiers and civilians moving about their business. Yates led them through the gates and toward the main building, where an officer stood talking with a group of men. "Excuse me," Hannah called out. "I am looking for Sergeant Thomas Keller." The officer turned, his eyebrows rising. "I am afraid Sergeant Keller is on patrol, madam. He is not expected back for another 2 days. Can I help you?" 2 days. Hannah felt hope and guilt war within her. "I am his sister. I was supposed to meet him here days ago, but I got caught in the storm." "Thank God you are safe," the officer said, genuine relief on his face. "Sergeant Keller has been beside himself with worry. We sent out search parties, but the storm made it impossible." "Where did you take shelter?" "I found a cabin," Hannah said, not quite looking at Yates. "I was very fortunate." The officer nodded. "Well, you are welcome to wait here at the fort for your brother to return. We have quarters for visiting family. I will have someone show you the way." "Actually," Hannah heard herself say, surprising herself, "if it would not be too much trouble, could I leave a message for my brother? To let him know I am safe and that I will return in a few days." The officer looked surprised. "Of course, but are you certain? You are welcome to stay here." "I am certain," Hannah said, and as she said it, she knew it was true. She was not ready to say goodbye to Yates yet. Not yet. They left Fort Stanton as the sun was setting, riding back the way they had come. Yates had said nothing when she announced her intention to return with him, but she had seen the flash of joy in his eyes, quickly suppressed but unmistakable. "You did not have to come back with me," he said after they had been riding for an hour. "I know," Hannah replied, "but I wanted to. I need more time to think, to figure out what I want." "And what do you want?" His voice was carefully neutral, but she could hear the tension beneath it. Hannah took a deep breath, knowing her answer would change everything. "I want you," she said simply. "I want this, us. Whatever this is between us." Yates reined in his horse so abruptly that Hannah nearly rode past him. He was off his mount in an instant, and before she could react, he had pulled her down and into his arms. His kiss was everything she had dreamed of and more, fierce and tender and filled with longing. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Yates rested his forehead against hers. "I have been wanting to do that for days," he confessed. "Why did you wait so long?" Hannah asked, breathless. "Because I wanted you to be sure. I wanted you to have a choice without pressure or obligation. You have that choice now. You can still go back to the fort, wait for your brother, and forget about me." "I could never forget about you," Hannah said, cupping his face in her hands. "From the moment I knocked on your door, you have been in my heart. I do not understand it, and maybe it makes no sense, but it is the truth." "It makes perfect sense to me," Yates said, kissing her again, slower this time, savoring it. They did not make it back to the cabin that night. Yates found a sheltered spot beneath an overhang of rock, and they made camp there, building a fire and laying out their bedrolls close together. For the first time, Hannah slept in Yates' arms, her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "Tell me what you are thinking," Yates murmured, his fingers tracing patterns on her back. "I am thinking about how strange life is," Hannah said. "A week ago, I was so certain about everything. I knew exactly what my life was supposed to look like. And now everything has changed and I do not mind at all." "What was your life supposed to look like?" he asked. She sighed. "I thought I would go to Fort Stanton, spend a few months with my brother, then return to Missouri. There is a man there, a friend of the family. He has asked me to marry him 3 times. I kept saying I needed time to think, but really I just could not bring myself to say yes." Yates tensed beneath her. "And now I know why I could never say yes to him," Hannah said, lifting her head to look at Yates. "I was waiting for this. For you. I just did not know it yet." Relief and joy flooded his expression. "I love you," he said, the words rough with emotion. "I know it is too soon, that we barely know each other, but I do. I love you, Hannah Keller." "I love you too," she whispered, and saying it felt like the most natural thing in the world. "I love you, Yates Brennan." They kissed again under the stars, the fire crackling beside them and the horses dozing nearby. It was perfect, this moment, untouched by the complications of the real world. But morning brought reality with it, as mornings always do. As they rode back to the cabin, Hannah knew they needed to talk about practical matters, about what came next. "I will need to tell my brother," she said as the cabin came into view. "About us. About my decision to stay." "I know," Yates said, "and I should meet him properly. Ask for his blessing if that matters to you." "It does," Hannah admitted. "He is all the family I have left. I want him to know that I am happy, that I have found something real." They spent the next 2 days preparing. Yates cleaned the cabin from top to bottom, suddenly self-conscious about his bachelor living conditions. Hannah helped, amused by his nervousness. "He is going to like you," she assured him. "How could he not?" "I am asking for his sister's hand after knowing her less than 2 weeks," Yates pointed out. "That does not exactly paint me in the best light." "You saved my life," Hannah reminded him. "That has to count for something." When the day came to return to Fort Stanton, they rode together, both nervous but excited. This time when they arrived, a familiar figure was waiting near the gates. "Thomas!" Hannah cried, sliding off her horse and running to her brother. He caught her in a fierce embrace, his face a mixture of relief and anger. "Hannah Marie Keller, you took 10 years off my life. When you did not arrive, when the storm hit, I thought," his voice cracked, and he held her tighter. "I am sorry," she said, hugging him back just as hard. "I am so sorry I worried you, but I am fine. I am better than fine." Thomas pulled back, his eyes narrowing as he noticed Yates standing awkwardly beside the horses. "Who is this?" "This is Yates Brennan," Hannah said, reaching back to take Yates' hand and draw him forward. "He is the man who saved my life, and he is the man I am going to marry." Thomas' eyes went wide. "You are what?" Over the next hour, sitting in the officers' mess over coffee, they told Thomas the whole story. Hannah watched her brother's face as they talked, seeing his initial skepticism gradually give way to understanding. "You are serious about this?" Thomas asked Hannah when they had finished. "You have known him less than 2 weeks." "I have never been more serious about anything in my life," Hannah said firmly. "I know it seems fast, but Thomas, when you know, you know. You always told me that when I met the right person, I would be certain. Well, I am certain." Thomas turned his attention to Yates. "What are your intentions toward my sister?" "I love her," Yates said simply. "I want to marry her, build a life with her. I have a cabin, some land, and a small but growing horse business. It is not much, but it is honest work and I can provide for her." "Can you keep her safe?" Thomas pressed. "With my life," Yates said without hesitation. "I know what it is to lose people you love, Sergeant. I will protect Hannah with everything I have." Thomas studied him for a long moment, then turned back to Hannah. "Are you sure? Really, truly sure? Because once you marry him, once you commit to this life, it will not be easy to change your mind." "I am sure," Hannah said, squeezing Yates' hand under the table. "I have never been more sure of anything." Thomas sighed, but there was a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Then I suppose I should give you my blessing. God knows you are too stubborn to listen to me anyway." Hannah laughed and threw her arms around her brother. Thank you for understanding." "I am not sure I do understand," Thomas admitted, "but I can see that you are happy. Happier than I have seen you in years. That is enough for me." They made arrangements for the wedding to take place at the fort the following week, giving Thomas time to arrange leave and for Hannah to send word to the few friends she had in Santa Fe. It was a small ceremony, simple but heartfelt, conducted by the fort chaplain in the small chapel. Hannah wore a dress borrowed from the wife of one of the officers, altered to fit her slender frame. Yates stood at the altar in his best clothes, his hair neatly trimmed and his beard freshly shaped, looking more nervous than she had ever seen him. "Dearly beloved," the chaplain began, and Hannah felt tears prick at her eyes. The ceremony passed in a blur. She heard herself making vows, promising to love and honor Yates for the rest of her life. She heard his voice, steady and strong, promising the same. And then the chaplain was pronouncing them man and wife, and Yates was kissing her, and nothing else mattered. The small gathering of soldiers and officers cheered, and Thomas clapped Yates on the back. "Welcome to the family," he said. "Take care of her or you will answer to me." "Understood," Yates said with a grin. They celebrated with a simple dinner in the officers' mess, and then, as the sun began to set, Yates and Hannah prepared to leave for their new home together. "Visit when you can," Thomas said as he hugged his sister goodbye. "I want to make sure you are doing well." "I will," Hannah promised. "And you are always welcome at our home, such as it is." "Such as it is," Thomas repeated with a smile. "Take care of yourself, little sister." The ride back to the cabin felt different now. They were no longer two separate people but a married couple, bound together by law and love. Hannah felt a thrill of excitement mixed with nervousness. This was the beginning of her new life, a life she had not planned but that felt more right than anything she could have imagined. When they reached the cabin, Yates dismounted and lifted Hannah down from her horse, but instead of setting her on her feet, he carried her toward the door. "What are you doing?" she laughed. "Carrying my bride over the threshold," he said. "It is tradition." "Since when do you care about tradition?" "Since I married you," he said, kicking the door open and carrying her inside. He set her down gently in front of the fire, which they had banked before leaving but which still glowed with embers. Yates quickly added wood, coaxing the flames back to life, while Hannah looked around the cabin with new eyes. This was her home now, their home. "Are you having second thoughts?" Yates asked, watching her face carefully. "Not even for a moment," Hannah assured him. She went to him, wrapping her arms around his waist and laying her head against his chest. "This is exactly where I want to be." He held her close, his chin resting on the top of her head. "I keep thinking I am going to wake up and find this was all a dream, that you were never really here." "I am here," Hannah said. "I am real and I am yours. Forever." That night they shared the bed not as host and guest, not as strangers thrown together by circumstance, but as husband and wife. And as Yates held her close, Hannah sent up a silent prayer of gratitude for the storm that had brought her to his door. The months that followed were the happiest of Hannah's life. She threw herself into making the cabin a home, sewing curtains for the windows, and learning to cook the simple but hearty meals that sustained them. Yates taught her about the horses, and she discovered she had a natural way with them. Together, they worked to expand the operation, gradually building a reputation for quality stock. Spring came, melting the snow and painting the landscape in shades of green and gold. Hannah planted a garden, coaxing vegetables from the rich soil, and took pride in watching things grow. Yates built her a chicken coop, and soon they had fresh eggs every morning. "This is a good life," Hannah said one evening as they sat on the porch Yates had built, watching the sun set over the mountains. "It is a simple life," Yates said, "not what you were used to." "It is a better life than I was used to," Hannah corrected. "Back in Missouri, I was just existing, going through the motions. Here with you, I am truly living." He took her hand, bringing it to his lips. "I love you more every day," he said. "I did not think that was possible, but it is true." Summer brought its own challenges. The heat was intense, and they had to work harder to keep the horses comfortable and the garden watered. But they faced each challenge together, their bond growing stronger with each shared obstacle overcome. Thomas visited twice that summer, and each time he came, Hannah could see him relax a little more, seeing how happy she was. He and Yates developed a friendship of their own, bonding over their shared military experience and mutual love for Hannah. "You have done well for yourself," Thomas told Hannah on his second visit, watching as Yates worked with a young horse in the corral. "I will admit I had my doubts at first, but he is a good man." "The best," Hannah agreed, her eyes on her husband. That fall, Hannah discovered she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but had waited to be certain before telling Yates. When she finally shared the news, his reaction was everything she could have hoped for. He swept her up in his arms, laughing and crying at the same time. "We are going to have a baby," he kept saying, as if he could not quite believe it. "We are going to be parents." "Are you happy?" Hannah asked, though she could see the answer written all over his face. "Happy does not even begin to cover it," Yates said, kissing her soundly. "You have given me everything, Hannah. A home, a purpose, love, and now a child. I am the luckiest man alive." The pregnancy was not easy. Hannah struggled with sickness in the early months and fatigue that left her exhausted. But Yates was patient and attentive, taking on extra chores and insisting she rest. He brought her tea when she was nauseous and held her hair when she could not keep anything down. He rubbed her feet when they swelled and her back when it ached. "You do not have to do all this," Hannah protested weakly one evening as he helped her into bed. "Yes, I do," Yates said firmly. "You are carrying our child. The least I can do is make you comfortable." Winter came again, a full year after the storm that had brought them together. As the anniversary of that fateful day approached, they talked about how much had changed. "A year ago, I was alone in this cabin, convinced that was how I would spend the rest of my life," Yates said. "I had made peace with it, or so I thought. And now?" Hannah prompted, her hand resting on her growing belly. "Now I cannot imagine being alone," he said. "You are my everything, Hannah. You and this little one. You are my whole world." The baby came in early spring after a long and difficult labor that left both Hannah and Yates exhausted. But when the midwife from Fort Stanton finally placed the squalling infant in Hannah's arms, every moment of pain was forgotten. "A boy," the midwife announced with a smile. "A healthy, strong boy." Yates stared at his son with wonder, reaching out a tentative finger to touch the tiny hand. Immediately, the baby's fingers curled around his, gripping tight. "He is perfect," Yates whispered, tears streaming down his face. "Absolutely perfect." They named him Samuel Thomas after Yates' father and Hannah's brother. Thomas himself arrived 3 days later, having ridden hard from Fort Stanton when word reached him that his sister had gone into labor. "Let me see my nephew," he demanded, and Hannah laughed at his eagerness. Thomas held little Samuel with surprising gentleness, a soft smile on his face. "He looks like you," he told Yates. "Poor kid." "He has Hannah's eyes," Yates said proudly, "and her stubbornness, I suspect." "Then you are in trouble," Thomas said with a grin. The months that followed were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. Samuel was a good baby, healthy and alert, but he still required constant attention. Hannah sometimes felt like she would never sleep again, but Yates was there every step of the way, walking the floor with Samuel when he fussed at night and changing nappies without complaint. "You are a natural at this," Hannah observed one evening, watching Yates rock their son to sleep. "I am terrified every moment," Yates admitted, "but I love him so much it hurts. I would do anything for him, for both of you." As Samuel grew from an infant to a toddler, the little cabin became filled with laughter and light. He was a curious child, always getting into things, and he had his mother's fearlessness and his father's quiet determination. "He is going to be a handful," Hannah said, watching as 2-year-old Samuel tried unsuccessfully to climb onto one of the horses. "He comes by it honestly," Yates said, scooping up his son before he could get into real trouble. His mother did knock on a stranger's door in the middle of a blizzard after all. "That worked out pretty well," Hannah pointed out. "Yes," Yates agreed, kissing her temple. "Yes, it did." They expanded the cabin, adding 2 more rooms to accommodate their growing family. The horse business thrived, and they were able to hire help occasionally, giving them more time to spend with Samuel. When Samuel was 3, Hannah became pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, perhaps because she knew what to expect. Their daughter was born on a clear summer morning, coming into the world with barely a cry. "She is beautiful," Yates breathed, cradling his daughter, "just like her mother." They named her Rosalina after both their mothers. She was a quiet baby, content to observe the world with wide, curious eyes. Samuel was immediately protective of his little sister, always wanting to help care for her. Thomas, who had been promoted to lieutenant, visited as often as his duties allowed. He never married, claiming that watching his sister and brother-in-law had set an impossibly high standard. "You two are disgustingly happy," he said once, but there was no malice in his words, only affection. "We really are," Hannah agreed, feeling no need to deny it. The years passed quickly, marked by seasons and birthdays and small milestones. Samuel learned to ride almost before he could walk properly, while Rose showed an early talent for drawing, covering scraps of paper with surprisingly detailed sketches of horses and landscapes. When Samuel was 7 and Rose was 4, Hannah found herself pregnant once more. This pregnancy was unexpected and left her feeling older and more tired than the previous 2, but Yates was as supportive as ever. 3 children, he marveled. "Can you believe it?" "Barely," Hannah admitted. "Sometimes I still cannot believe any of this is real. That I have this life, this family." Their 3rd child, a boy they named James Henry, was born in the winter, during a snowstorm that reminded Hannah powerfully of the storm that had brought her to Yates' door all those years ago. "Do you remember?" she asked Yates as they sat by the fire with their newborn son sleeping between them. "The first storm. Every detail," Yates said. "How you looked when I opened the door, half frozen but still so brave. How I knew even then that you were going to change my life." "You saved my life," Hannah said. "In more ways than one. I was just going through the motions before I met you. You gave me purpose, love, a real home." "You gave me the same," Yates said, his arm around her shoulders. "I was alone, convinced that was what I deserved. And then you knocked on my door, and everything changed." They sat in comfortable silence, watching their son sleep, hearing the older children playing quietly in their room. Outside, the snow fell steadily, but inside they were warm and safe and together. Samuel grew into a serious, responsible young man who loved the horses as much as his father did. By the time he was 14, he was working alongside Yates full-time, learning every aspect of the business. Rose developed her artistic talents, and her drawings became so skilled that people began commissioning her work. She had a gentle soul and a gift for seeing beauty in everything. James was the wild card, full of energy and mischief, keeping his parents on their toes. When Thomas finally retired from the army at 50, he came to live with them, taking over the small cottage they had built originally for hired help. He spent his days helping with the horses and his evenings teaching his nephews and niece to play chess. "This is a good life you have built here," Thomas told Hannah one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sun set. "We have been blessed," Hannah agreed. She was older now, past 40, with gray streaking her dark hair and lines around her eyes from years of squinting into the sun. But she had never been happier. "You ever think about what would have happened if that storm had not come?" Thomas asked. "If you had made it to the fort that day as planned," Hannah considered the question. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but not with regret. I think that storm was meant to happen. I think I was meant to knock on that door. Everything in my life led me to that moment, to Yates." "Fate," Thomas said. "Love," Hannah corrected. "Fate brought me to his door, but love made me stay." As the years continued to pass, Hannah and Yates watched their children grow into adults. Samuel married a sweet girl from Fort Stanton and brought her to live on the property, building a house of his own nearby. Rose met a traveling artist who appreciated her talent, and though it broke Hannah's heart a little to see her daughter move away, she knew Rose needed to follow her own path. James, true to form, joined the cavalry like his uncle, seeking adventure and purpose. "Our children are all grown," Hannah said to Yates on their 20th wedding anniversary. They were older now, graying and slower, but the love between them had not diminished. If anything, it had grown deeper and stronger with each passing year. "And we are grandparents," Yates added, watching Samuel's 2 children play in the yard. "Who would have thought?" "I would have," Hannah said, taking his hand. "From the moment you opened that door, I knew my life was going to be full. I just did not know how full." They sat together on the porch they had sat on so many times before, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. The cabin that had once housed a lonely man now sat at the center of a thriving family compound. The horse business had grown beyond anything they could have imagined, with buyers coming from as far away as Texas to purchase their stock. But none of the success, none of the material comfort, mattered as much as the simple fact that they had each other. "You remember what you said to me?" Hannah asked. "That first night when I thanked you for saving my life." Yates smiled, the memory as clear as if it had happened yesterday. "I said you were no stranger to me anymore." "You were right," Hannah said softly. "In that moment we stopped being strangers. We became something more, something that would last a lifetime. And beyond," Yates added, pulling her close. As the sun set on another day, casting long shadows across the land they had built their life on, Hannah reflected on the journey that had brought her here. A storm that could have killed her had instead led her to the love of her life. A knock on a stranger's door had opened up a whole new world. She thought about the girl she had been, traveling alone through a New Mexico winter, so certain she knew what her life should look like. That girl could never have imagined this future, this abundance of love and family and purpose. "What are you thinking about?" Yates asked, reading her thoughtful expression. "How grateful I am," Hannah said, "for the storm, for your cabin being exactly where it was, for you opening the door and letting me in." "I am the grateful one," Yates insisted. "You brought light into my darkness, warmth into my cold." You gave me everything. We gave each other everything, Hannah corrected. As night fell, they went inside to the home they had built together through years of love and hard work. The fire burned in the hearth, the same hearth where they had first sat together all those years ago. So much had changed since that night, but the essential truth remained the same. They had found each other, two lost souls in a vast wilderness, and they had built something beautiful together. Later that night, lying in bed with Yates' arms around her, Hannah thought about how different her life could have been. She could have accepted that marriage proposal back in Missouri, lived a comfortable but passionless life. She could have made it to Fort Stanton that day, never knocked on Yates' door, never known what real love felt like. But the storm had come and she had knocked and he had answered. And everything that followed, all the joy and love and family, had stemmed from that single moment of connection. "I love you," she whispered to Yates, though she knew he was already asleep. "Love you too," he mumbled, pulling her closer. Hannah smiled in the darkness. After 20 years, he still always had to have the last word in their declarations of love. Some things never changed, and she would not want them to. As she drifted off to sleep, warm and safe in her husband's arms, Hannah sent up a prayer of thanks. For the storm that had nearly killed her but had instead saved her. For the stranger who had become her whole world. For the life they had built together in this wild, beautiful place. The winter wind whistled outside, but inside there was only warmth and love and peace. Hannah Brennan fell asleep with a smile on her face, knowing she was exactly where she was meant to be, with exactly who she was meant to be with, living exactly the life she was meant to live. And in the morning, when she woke to another day with Yates beside her, she would be grateful all over again for the storm that had brought her home.